One. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another exciting film journey here on Inside Movies Galore. I am one of your hosts, but tonight we are celebrating birthdays in this month. I believe we have four spots that we had arranged for Brandon's birthday and my birthday. And today we're going on with his first choice. Brandon, why don't you tell us a little bit about the movie that you subjected to us to this week?
So what we've got here is the 1988 Oliver Stone film Talk Radio. It is a film about a shock jock whose talk radio show has started to get new heights, and as they're about to go national, we get to see whether he can hold on to fame or burst into flame before he gets there. All right. So, this is a first for some of y'all, I know. Well, why don't we start with you, Dave? Is this the first time you've seen talk radio?
It is the first time that I've seen this film, and probably the last. Okay. I know that talk radio was a thing at one point in time, and I did get into Mancow, and I did get into Howard Stern from time to time, and I even think that the Howard Stern movie is a better talk radio movie than this is. That being said, the ending was weird, and I liked the ending. So, I do recognize that this is the same dude who took over Christian Slater's role in the new Interview with the Vampire series. That plays the talk radio show host. But in my mind, even though I know it probably took very good acting to play this obnoxious character, I just could not get into the character at all. Even though he had a wife that he apparently loved, he still treated her like shit towards the end, and it did not make me love the character at all. There was nothing likable about that. That being said, the background characters, it was interesting to see McGinley young, Alec Baldwin young, and some of the other characters. But forgettable movie, except for maybe the ending. There's my thoughts.
All right. How about you, Tammy? Was this your first time watching it?
Yeah, it's my first time. I thought it was alright. I mean, dude is like totally obnoxious. I mean, I don't know if I were called in on talk radio and somebody talked like that to me, I'd be like, forget you. So, he's very rude and crude, and like David said, he's not even nice to his, wife or mistress, or, well, I guess he's got both, but I guess it was, it was interesting, and in the fact that there was so many different topics he covered, and then to see how he reacted to them and how his people that came on the radio reacted. It just, but yeah, it was interesting. Like I said, I found him kind of rude and crude, but it was at least interesting.
All right. Well, Jake, was this your first time watching talk radio?
This was not my first time. It's my first time seeing it in a long time. And I cannot swear to it that I only saw it once before, but I think I did. I think I bought this one partly because it was cheap and partly because it was an Oliver Stone film, and I was just curious about that. was one that I always remembered in the back of my mind, but I had forgotten a lot about it. I had forgotten John C. McGinley was in it. I had forgotten Alec Baldwin was in it. Dave's right, they're a lot younger here than what we usually see. And I'd, forgotten some of the other stuff. For me, this may have been the first and most notable starring role I've seen from Eric Bogosian, but to me, my introduction to him, stellar though it was the Steven Seagal film Under Siege 2 Dark Territory, where he played the antagonist. And I will always remember him for the introducing me to the phrase that I know this is a phrase that's been used many times. I doubt it originated with that film or that character. But his character in Under Siege 2 introduced me to the phrase that assumption is the mother of all fuck-ups. So I always remember him for that. So my understanding is that this was based on his play. He co-wrote it, and it was basically his theatrical debut as a movie actor. So good on him for that. And so if you're an Eric Bogosian fan, it is essential viewing. I definitely would say this is probably one of the darker and smaller scale Stone films that I've seen, because he does tend toward those big epic productions, I still need to see the Natural Born Killers, I admit. But other than that, this is certainly one of the darker ones. I will absolutely concur that Barry Champlain is not an easy character to get behind. Not at all. He is abrasive, obnoxious. He wantonly burns every bridge he can. I think just to see. I don't even know if he has an agenda with some of them. The movie is a very interesting exercise in the idea of how far is too far when it comes to free speech. It's a very interesting area that it goes into, but he is and he does grow as a character. He has what you could call a come to Jesus moment, even though he's Jewish. He has what you might call a come to Jesus moment near the end, that he does show some growth as a character, and you almost feel sorry for him by the end. But most of he is such an obnoxious jerk, and almost every time you feel sorry for him, he finds a way to remind you that he's an obnoxious jerk. Yeah. It's mostly a great performance, although I think he hams it up a bit in that big final speech. But overall, it's a movie that I'm not going to watch very often. It's kind of an ordeal to sit through, but it's interesting and well made, and I think that it could lead to a fun, interesting discussion. So it might be a good one it might have been a good one to try.
Well, of course, this isn't my first time watching it. That'd be interesting if I was putting it out there. I was like, nope, never seen it, never heard of it. But and of course, Eric Bogosian. Now I give him this. He has a voice that is perfect for radio. That is a perfect radio voice.
Yeah.
Now, he. My first exposure of this was through my father. It seems like every year lately, I've been taking my June picks and reflecting on something my father loved, which is I guess apt because this would be the 3rd anniversary of his death this very week. So, in a way, it actually works to the advantage. But I think, like I say, these last, I guess, 4 to 5 years, maybe? I can't remember. It's seemingly been focused on him. So I guess this is a way of continuing it. This was not my favorite film. I actually disliked this film for a long time. And of course, a lot of the stuff that made my father laugh about this are things that would make the modern me cringe hearing it. So it was it's an interesting experience going back through it. And I wanted to pair this and Pump Up the Volume, which is my favorite of the two, is Pump Up the Volume, which is why I put that one on my birthday instead of this one. But I look at it as more of a psychological profile of a person who self-loathing is eating him alive, despite other people's efforts to try and pull him out of the mire. He keeps clawing deeper into his own darkness. And that psychological profile is hard to watch, but is interesting to explore as he goes. And you get to see a little bit of it, a little bit of the normal him, and the him that is caving under the pressures that have been swelling up around him all this time. I would like to say that this character is not meant to be a likable character. So if you didn't like him, then the movie did a perfect job at what it was going for. If you did like him, like my father did, then the movie failed and fell flat on its face, at least as far as he was concerned. My father really liked and actually admired this character, which is goes to speak as to how my father was.
I'm not surprised.
So that is my experience with talk radio. But let's talk about all of that, because talk radio it's still a thing, but it's nowhere near as widespread as it was in the 80s and early 90s. I remember that before, I think it was Reagan that got away with the Fairness Doctrine in the 80s, talk radio was all over the place. You found a lot of topics here, there, and everywhere. And then, of course, after that went away, it was by the time you got to maybe the late 90s, early 2000s, it was just conservative pundits. As you were listening to talk radio, it was pretty much that, with the occasional other.
I wouldn't say it's all, but a good chunk of it.
So it used to be that Rush Limbaugh was kind of a special thing, and then everybody else, it was like a bunch of Rush Limbaugh clones after that. But still, I did enjoy talk radio back in the when its incarnation was a little bit more, had more of an edge to it that was kind of burned.
What was Howard Stern's heyday? Was pretty much late 80s, early 90s, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I know his movie
there's
was
a lot of Howard Stern in this guy.
What's that?
There's a lot of Howard Stern in this guy.
Right.
Not quite as, he wasn't as angry as this guy.
Right. Well, and apparently this movie, it's worth noting, was apparently inspired by an actual, not only an actual personality, radio personality, but an actual murder.
Yeah.
Of the radio personality was Alan Berg, who was murdered in 1984. So that, and apparently there was another movie came out the same year that was kind of inspired by the same events. But but yeah, I know like so-called shock jocks were big for a minute there. Am I remembering correctly that was also a feature in The Fisher King? Like, wasn't that Jeff Bridges' character?
I think so. He was I thought he was a reporter. I don't know what he was, but yeah.
I remember there was another movie around that time that featured a shock jock. I think that was it. But
yeah, they hit their peak, I think, in between the mid '80s and early '90s, and then kind of waned towards political propagandists. I guess after that. But let's dig in, I guess, to talk radio. So we have kind of 3 acts to this play, so to speak, and it was originally a play, so it makes sense. Plus 3-act structure, you know.
And there were a few times where I felt like it has sort of a play's staging, you might say, in a lot of ways. The fact that a lot of it takes place in the booth and around the booth, that's an extremely convenient setting for something that was originally a play. But even like that lengthy flashback sequence in the middle, the way it's cut and staged, it almost feels like that. It feels like a natural adaptation of a play. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So the way this is it's really 3 acts. The first act is just the introductory act, where we get to sit through a full show. We get the introduction of the concept that yes, next week we are going national, and what potential concerns our star has with that. And then the middle act is essentially away from the radio station. You get a little bit of background as to how the guy started, but then there's a lot about him, his ex-wife, his girlfriend, and just in general, what's going on with him in the real world. And then the final act is that downward spiral to hell that we get on the night that was supposed to be going national. So I figured that the most fair thing to do would be to divide this into the 3 acts, into 3 parts. So let's discuss, well, part 1, where we get introduced to him, to a lot of the callers. We get introduced to people like Chet, a whole bunch of neo-Nazis, or, you know, again, not too different than how we are today, I guess. And in general, his shock jock ways, as well as to his manager, who is a bald one. So, what are y'all's thoughts of this first act with the introduction to the shock jock and his show?
Well, he's kind of a dick in front of a mic. So
yeah, that's why people listen to him.
he does not know how to stop his mouth, and people either I think a lot of people just dislike him for doing that, but also like listening to his show because of it. They think his mouth is so dirty that they ridicule him off radio, you know, and that's what I'm getting from a lot of them. That he spurned a lot of hate from a lot of people. And in a time where people were very much thought that their opinions mattered, and also some people took it to an extreme point of violence. So I feel like he had an uncontrollable mouth, didn't know when to stop, and you know, he attracted a lot of sick psychos and depressed people.
He gave them a platform, and a lot of times, especially in the 80s, I mean, we're talking late 80s, everybody was being censored. And it's very rare for somebody to be willing to give something like that a platform. That's one of the reasons why he got so concerned is that, well, what if they say, no, you can only have boring people on your show. You're not allowed to be mean on your show. Of course, then it wouldn't be his show anymore. It would be kind of lame, boring.
Well, that's one of the major plot points. One of the major what's the word I'm looking for? Sources of tension in the story is that when he learns about the going national. You see a lot of these shows where they learn they're getting nationally syndicated. That's like a cause for celebration. Like, holy crap, people are going to hear us all over. And his boss basically springs it on him right before the show because his boss knows him well enough. Baldwin's character knows him well enough to know what his first response is going to be. And his first response is not, holy shit, I'm going national. His first response is, who's this joker and how is he going to make me dumb my show down so that we don't offend the censors? That's where his mind is. And I think one of the that's like one of the main external conflicts in the movie is him wanting to stay true to his vision of this is a free forum and screw the man. The man is not in this booth. I'm in this booth. And what I want to let people say what they want to say. But another source of conflict throughout the movie is him versus his own ego and his own, as Dave says, he can't shut up his own mouth. He wants to give everyone a forum for a free expression, and I think he's genuine in that. But he's also arrogant enough and egotistical enough that he's constantly cutting people off, talking people over people, insulting people for their
Which
views.
is where the free form cuts out because
Right.
If
He's a
you're
hypocrite.
allowing people to talk and express themselves, that's one thing. He's not allowing them to do that. He's only allowing them to get so far enough so that he can come back with some wicked commentary backward at them and sound funny, at least in his mind.
It's a forum for him to express himself freely, but he bills it as a free expression forum. And like I said, I don't think he is even fully aware of how hypocritical he's being.
Not until Act 3, anyway.
Yeah, later on he realizes it. Like I said, he has that come to Jesus moment, and we'll get to that. That's probably like toward the end of Act 2, start of Act 3, I guess. We'll see how Brandon has that figured out. But he has that moment where he's sitting there and he realizes, is this what I'm doing? Really? But yeah, there's so many times that and at one point, I believe he actually did accuse someone of masochism. I think a lot of his callers are masochistic because I think some of them actually want to be abused and they're willing, some of them want to be on the airwaves. Like there's a certain amount of, oh, I was on the radio, and they're probably willing to put up with anything to say, hey, I was on the radio last night. Do you hear it? So a lot of the people that call in, they're putting up with all this abuse, but then you have, of course, the people who call in because they want to tell him what they think. And that's, as the night goes on, he gets some increasingly disconcerting calls in that game. But yeah.
One of the things that, and it comes out in Act 3 more than others, but he really hates it when people really try to compliment him. He doesn't care for himself. He doesn't like himself.
He calls it kissing ass.
Yeah. And he looks at this. I mean, there are a couple of things that he would just lay into. There was one of my father's favorite lines from this was when he comes in there and the guy comes on and says, hello, I'm a black man. And then his response is, so what do you want, a medal? And that, and I'm always like, I looked at my father sideways when he first laughed at that, and he still laughed uproariously at that comment over and over again, because it turned into this thing, this racial thing of, well, black versus Jew. That's how he put it up there.
Right.
And that, and there is something to that, but my goodness, that was a call that dude was probably not expecting when he came on. And you get to hear him, and you get to hear that caller come back at the end when they're talking, when they're doing those comments after his death, which is interesting. And you find out a lot of the people who get shouted out there, they don't necessarily hate him for that. They expect that if they're long-term listeners. And that's an interesting thing if you look at it. But you also have those people, you have the ones he insults, and then you have the neo-Nazis and the white supremacists.
Yeah.
I mean, not really that different from them today when given a forum, which they are. They tend to try and not just take it, but they try to run with it. And that's a mistake that he has made, that sometimes free speech does come with an issue.
Yeah.
When you do say, you know what, no, if we should allow neo-Nazis to be able to spread their propaganda as much as they want, and we should punish anybody who calls them out. That's not necessarily free speech. And that's a statement that you get to see here, is that sometimes it can get dangerous allowing these people to continue, that they can tend to build.
Right.
I don't even remember which person ended up shooting him at the end. I don't think it was one of the neo-Nazis, though.
I don't think it was. Actually, apparently, the psychiatrist who comes on after him said something about meeting a disturbed person on her way in, and it was probably the same person that shot him, but he didn't know anything about that because he wasn't listening to her show. Does anyone else remember the names of those particular people? Because I feel like Chet was one of them.
Well, Chet was the. I thought Chet was the kid. Well,
No. That kid was. You talking about the kid that he brings in?
yeah.
No.
The
That
kid
was
actually
Michael
played,
Wincott.
Yep.
That was Kent.
Kent. That was what I think. Chet
Yeah.
was one of the neo-Nazis then, yeah.
Yeah. So Chet and Black John and Jerry. I can't remember with certainty which characters each of those were, but I feel like maybe they were the three, or there were 3 or 4, I think, of the neo-Nazis are called. Interestingly enough, they were voiced by Earl Hindman, the fellow who played Wilson on Home Improvement. I'm like, this is a very different role for him.
Slightly different. So what are y'all's thoughts on the neo-Nazis that call in?
One of them was very polite and well-spoken. You could see how he brought people to his side. He was very saying some horrible things, but he sounded like this kindly old man. A couple of them sounded more like, I guess you might say, the stereotypical kind of. Yeah, but they all had some messed up things to say, that's for sure.
What about y'all thoughts? Y'all, these seem like do you feel like these people's being given this much rope that they ended up using it to hang him with it? Or do you feel like it was a good thing that they were given as much of a platform?
I believe that they definitely, these people definitely gave him enough rope to hang on, to set himself to go down in flames as a talk radio person in general, but because he was starting to really talk some real racial stuff back at some of these people. And he made fun of them too. Each and every one, one of them, including the old lady who came on and was like, "I love your show."
Well,
You know,
and you know why he was upset with her, right?
he was upset with her because she was kissing his ass.
No, well, if you're talking about the same one I think you're talking about, it was because he wanted to know what she loved about the show, and she couldn't tell him anything.
It was shallow.
It's what?
It was a shallow.
It was shallow, yes. And I think one of the themes in this one is very similar to what we saw in shows like The Truman Show and Ed TV and whatever. The movie is partly a satire on people's obsession with the media. And I think she was a good example of someone, she probably had his show on just to have the radio on, to have something in the background. She probably wasn't even listening to what he was saying or how he was treating the callers. Brandon pointed out he had a good voice for radio. So if you weren't listening to anything, it probably did make good background noise.
Oh, yeah.
And that's probably what he was thinking, was that she just has this on in the background. She doesn't actually know who the hell I am. And I think that's why he lost his patience with her.
And honestly, in all reality, it really doesn't matter whether she listens to him or not. It just the fact that he's got a listener he should be happy with.
Yes, but you got to admit, if someone's lathering praise on you but can't even tell you why, that definitely comes across as shallow and insincere.
And again, this is who he is on the radio. It's if she really was a true fan, then she would expect it. And that's the I'm not now. Keep in mind, I don't like this guy worth anything. He hurts himself. He hurts all those around him, but that's all about the fact that he can't stand himself, and he doesn't understand why anybody else would like him. So anybody who comes close to him, he ends up pushing away or hurting because of that. And this is true for people in the real world as well. People who self-hate like this. I don't know. It's just it's an interesting psychological thing. As far as somebody who's there now, me watching it on a half feverish mind probably took a different step.
There are those kind of shows that have been out there where people get treated like shit, and yet they still come back and listen to it.
Mm-hmm.
There has been that kind of thing.
Well, people love negativity,
and
that's the thing. People come back again and again. I mean, for these types of people, and he knows it. This is
I like to call it the yo-yo effect.
For every listener that he loses permanently because he insulted them, he probably made 20 new fans, because people love hearing people get trash talked by other people. That's one of the reasons why a lot of these political pundits have a job at all.
Yeah,
is because people love hearing them talk shit about other people.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, one good example of something that does happen on the more moderns is that a lot of political pundits will carefully screen calls and will find people who are on the opposite side, but they will screen them to make sure that they are kind of easy prey for the pundit themselves. Limbaugh, for better or for worse, love him or hate him, his screeners were excellent at this. I guess the name Snerdley was the screener. I used to actually, I always tried to put myself as wanting to hear what the other side thought. So I listened to Limbaugh a lot in the 2000s. But he always managed to find the people who couldn't really talk back. They could just, like that woman, they could only express hollow reports, which one made him look good, and two, he was able to make them look like idiots as he put them in their place. And this is the kind of thing that a lot of people love to hear and listen to. Kent is a good example of one of those demographics that loves his show.
Oh, yeah.
No matter how hard he lent into Kent, you notice that Kent was like, yeah, and just eating it up.
Party on, man.
Because that was what he was about. And he was like, he knew what it was about. He was loving it. People love that negativity. They drink it in. It's a cancer on America, as he would say, but it's true. People,
and actually, Kent's probably worth mentioning because his first call was during that early part where he calls in acting like his girlfriend had OD'd. And he calls back after the weekend. So I think she's definitely dead. Like, and it's just like, as a prank call, it really isn't funny on any level. I don't know why he was amused by it, but and Barry Bogosian's character sees through it from the get-go. He sees that it's just a kid screwing around, but his producer and his boss and everyone are like, don't give this kid you just cut him off. This is not funny. This is not good. But he goes and he gives him just enough time to where, for whatever reason, Kent felt that the joke had run its course, and he owned up to it on air. And it's like, okay, this kid has some weird ass hobbies, I gotta say. But he definitely feels like he's pretty drug addled. So I'm not really sure beyond that what his damage might be, but I guess he is also supposed to be sort of a comment on the youth.
Well, that's 80s youth for you. 80s teenagers, I should say.
Right.
Very different from 90s teenagers, which I was in that generation, not the Kent generation. So, but still.
Yeah. Well, and I guess you could see, like, Kent really, I don't know. He definitely seemed like he was trying really hard to rebel, just be this rebellious spirit, but he didn't have any way to focus it productively, I guess is a good way to put it. And he just comes off as a bleeding moron.
Brandon, how do you think the 90s was any different?
I'm not saying that the kids were any better intelligence-wise. It's just a presentation.
Right.
Whereas a lot of the times you had your more metal, your Bon Jovi, or your people on that end, which was the 80s teenagers. Whereas the 90s, you had your closer to your dude, those people.
Your surfer bro attitude.
Yeah, it was like this kid felt like he was trying really hard to be Bon Jovi.
Now, I will say this: the '90s kids weren't quite as because they had so much of an anti-drug theme. The '90s teens were less into that and just more empty-headed. Whereas the whole rock and roll burnout scene was bigger in the 80s.
Nah, bro. I think that it was just totally gnarly, man.
I mean, and then of course you get into the 2000s. That's when things like straight edge and all that were taking place. But then after the mid 2000s, things got right back to crazy again.
Right.
I just was curious because I was more of the 80s, and like you and David, and I'm not sure your age, Jake, but
I believe I'm between Brandon and Dave, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, younger than me, older than Dave.
Yeah.
I know
I'm
definitely
older
a little
than
bit
all of
younger
you.
than
So.
Brandon.
What's that?
And I said I'm
I'm
older than
turning
all of you.
40 this year, so
Yep. So
Yeah, Dave's the baby.
yep, you're gonna this year. Yep, you're about 5 years behind me. Which is okay because that means you were in your late teens you were in your teens in the late 90s, which is a different time.
And I was like in my teens in the 80s.
Yep. So it's like
Yeah, see, I was getting into Nirvana at that point in time, grunge, the grunge area.
And that's probably a big part of the difference Brandon was talking about. Like 80s was like metal and hair bands, and 90s was like the grunge and the alternative, you know.
Nice guys finished last. We're almost out of gas.
We had Hanson. But of course, when you look at this first part, you really do establish. It does establish some of the side characters, like his girlfriend, who's also his producer, Alec Baldwin as his boss, and of course the other guy. What's the other guy's name?
Dude, you talking about the sound check?
Yeah.
Sound.
And he even made it like people could not stand him, but I was the one who lasted the longest because I don't care about his.
Well, we see from the flashbacks that Stu was there almost from the start.
Yeah.
He and Barry
in the beginning.
He and Barry were buds, but I think it kind of, I think over the time it turned sour. Like they know each other's, how each other works, and they work well as a team. But I think Stu has just gotten tired of Barry's shit. That's pretty much it.
I think everybody's gotten tired of his shit.
Well, yeah.
Except for the producer girlfriend,
she hasn't been around long enough.
So, which is weird, because she even tries to get closer to him by the end of it.
Yeah.
But this is really, at the end of it all revolves around him.
Yeah.
And even his willingness to basically cut through the bullshit. Kent was a good example, but in the first act, the best example was probably him being sent that package by that Nazi, and him just like, nah, don't you dare call the police. I'm going to, and he opened it up, which was just a dead rat. A Nazi.
Well, it was the guy on the phone claimed it was a bomb.
Yeah.
And everyone else is running around like chickens with their heads cut off. Like, oh my God, their bomb's been sent to the station. And he just called bullshit on it right away. And of course, if he had been wrong,
Well, he didn't care.
Basically dead rat. Yeah.
He didn't believe that anyone would do what they did to him in the end. I don't think he expected that.
But at the end of it, it didn't seem like it was one of the neo-Nazis that did it. It wasn't coming from the place everybody expected it to.
Yeah.
I think it was the farmer or whatever the heck he was talking to before that last psychologist dude. I think there was some kind of either farmer or redneck that he was talking to.
The one I cannot remember who it was that killed him. There's a part of me that wants it that thinks it's that guy who's always doing all those positive affirmations. Apparently he was a frequent caller because Barry was just letting him get on and talk about unbridled positivity and just letting him go on and for that amusement there. And then of course there was a slip in the guy's voice that made you wonder if maybe he was one of those nasty callers as well. Because you also have to look into it. How many of these people are actually just doing it don't actually believe what they say, just doing it to go off on the air?
I got the impression, and maybe you heard something I didn't or whatever. I felt like that guy might have actually been one of those people who basically lives their life in maxims and affirmations and idioms, like constantly quoting these things, not just to quote them, but like, and I think he probably also was, and Brandon, I'm sure you've had this. I know when I was in the call center at the library, I definitely had this. And well, really, I've had this in a lot of jobs. You get those older people who are just lonely and just want to talk. And you get the definite impression that this guy was one of those people, that he called in regularly just to talk. And I think Barry let him talk as much as he did because he was amused by it, you know?
And again, I actually think that call also reflected that Barry wasn't always about darkness necessarily. I think that I think he was more into something genuine.
Yeah.
And when he felt like somebody was genuine, he usually, even if they were the freaking neo-Nazis, if he felt they were genuine about it, he gave them more of a stage. It's when he thought that they were basically talking BS that they just cut them off.
Right. And also he did show on more than one occasion that he, for all his self-loathing and his willingness to let people spew darkness, he did want to see some light come through. And he may have let that guy on every time he called just so that he could be guaranteed a ray of sunshine for just a few minutes.
The guy, he even made the comment. It's like, oh yeah, every week.
Yeah.
But yeah, the bomb thing was pretty much, I think, the highlight of the first act, or at least a high tension moment. Where, of course, it wasn't a bomb, but a rat on the Nazi flag with a crudely written letter in crayon, misspelled, as you do. And, of course, he's just sitting there and just flips the flag over his shoulder, messing with the letter. But
I was wondering if it was really, really a bomb or not, because the way this guy was describing the thing, he's describing the package to a till and everything, and everybody else was getting all concerned, and they were all going to call the cops and everything else. And say, is this really a bomb or not? And he's just going to sit there and, let it go off.
I think he was right in one way, is all these people, for all the threatening that they did, a lot of them also wouldn't kill him because he gives them something that they don't get normally, which is a platform. So it's a likelihood that, at least in trying to get into his head, which is not a very good place to be, that very well might be his logic, which is why I don't think it was one of the neo-Nazis that shot him at the end. I think it was one of the less stable people that had called in for help, and that he kind of just slapped their hand away. But then that's just my thought, my take on it.
Okay.
But why don't we wind into Act 2 a little bit, because we've been kind of intertwining the two talk shows with 1 and 3, because, well, they are similar in a lot of ways. It's just 3 is a heck of a lot more intense and a heck of a lot darker. But Act 2, we see Barry basically on the weekend. He called the ex-wife to come with the show because he wanted her support, because there's a part of him that still does love her. And he's had some business stuff to talk with some of the people there, and he even goes to a rodeo where he's booed by everybody. And I mean, that's what you expect from somebody like that. The more people hate you, the more infamous you are, the more powerful you are in the on the airwaves.
Right.
And boy, they disliked him.
Yes,
You're right.
And of course, you also get a lot of the background. I mean, Barry's background was pretty simple. He was kind of this goofy guy who was was helping his wife with the running of a business where they were selling, clothing.
Were they running it? I kind of felt like he was just a clerk.
I can't remember. I feel like she was one of that she had connections in the business itself. But
he's basically working at a place like Burlington Coat Factory or something like that. Yeah.
But he ended up getting that break with one of his idols, and ended up basically turning on his idol, and then taking his idol's spot essentially.
Yeah, one of the customers happens to be a popular local talk show host, and he likes Barry's voice and his enthusiasm, and he says, come on down and we'll do a spot for this business. We'll let you do a spot. And he just lets him come on as a guest host. And he turns on him when Barry gets a little too big for his britches and does what he later does, which is he wants to give people license to say what they want to say, and the guy's like, no, don't ever do that again. I don't want to lose my job over this. And but the higher ups liked it, and they basically give Barry his own show because of it. So it's like
But what do y'all think of this middle part where, because you go places, there are a lot more set pieces here. It's not just on the radio, and you get to see Barry interact as Barry and not as the shock jock, though there is a blurred line there. What do y'all think of that second set?
He was actually almost likable back then.
No, he had the long hair.
The really long hair.
All innocent at one point.
What was the question again?
What did y'all think
there for a moment?
What did y'all think of Act 2? Could be Barry's backstory,
almost
like the backstory, his interaction with ex-wife and girlfriend.
I feel like they sort of kind of based his hair on Howard Stern. I swear.
Mm-hmm. Howard Stern definitely was an inspiration in this film.
There was definitely some influence, at least as far as hairstyles go. But I do think in the very beginning he did love his wife. It wasn't until it came to that moment where he needed to have a producer behind his show, and he asked her to do the show, and that's when he was like all, disappointed that she wouldn't produce for him, and yada yada yada, and that's when she realized that his fame meant more, at least more than the marriage that they had, because he said something like "fuck the marriage" or something like that.
Yeah.
So, and then of course there was that wild party that him and Stu had. So, which kind of broke it all up all the way. So, but I thought it was interesting that he was kind of co-hosting with Salmonius from Xena the Warrior Princess. So it was interesting. It was entertaining, and the fact that he would get mad, and then of course the guys from above called down and was like, "Bring him back tomorrow." We loved him.
Yeah, that is true. Well, I guess, and we will move past that because basically a lot of it was background. Um, Baldwin trying to get him to talk out some of the things that he could do to rein in the show with the new bosses, and Barry saying, "Nah, I'm blowing you off," and even like forgetting about calling his ex-wife and saying, "Yeah, I will pick you right up at the airport," and then forgetting that he did that. And she is an interesting character. You get introduced to her with the flashbacks, and she's kind of almost this very reserved kind of to herself person, but she seems to, after being separated from Barry, have come into her own a little bit more and become more of her own person. So in a way, she improved getting away from him. But what do y'all think of the ex-wife?
Well, the ex-wife kind of reminds me of not Seymour, but from Little Shop of Horrors, as far as voice-wise. The blonde that was in love with Rick Moranis' character.
Yeah.
And was going out with the dentist. I forget exactly what her name was at the moment. But she kind of reminds her as far as because she's got that higher voice range, you know.
No, that is true enough.
She seemed to talk a lot like her, also, and but she wasn't I guess, for lack of a better word, wasn't as naive as her. You know,
No.
The ex-wife seemed like she did have a good, you know, head on her shoulders, and she, after they were no longer together, she seemed like she really knew what she wanted to do and wanted what she wanted to do with herself and her life, and it seems like she's, for the most part, has done that, but she still cares about him. That's why she's there right now.
I didn't realize she starred in Pushing Daisies. That was a good, solid show. But yeah, it's a. I felt like she was an interest. Like, you wanted to feel for her because of what she had to put up with him. And I do think, yeah, she came into her own a little bit after leaving him. You definitely feel for when he kind of turns on her at the end. But overall, she wasn't a strong character, I thought. Like, in terms of the overall depth of the character. But, yeah.
True enough. So we get to see more of this, of course, in Act 3. The final act. And that one is a doozy because we find out that the his national gig is no longer on for now. It's not gone, but they're delaying it. Probably not too far off because of his unwillingness to say toe the line.
Would they say there were some
scheduling conflicts?
Some scheduling conflicts. Okay, yeah.
Which sounds like bullshit.
It was bullshit. Yeah, it was their way to try to get him to toe the line.
I almost wonder if it's because that head of the network dude already saw what's his name's attitude towards everyone, and his attitude towards the network dude, because he didn't even realize that the dude was there and the shit was happening. So I wonder if they did it just because, And I think that partially started his downfall, to be honest, because then he realized, oh fuck, I've lost my my spot. They've stuck me with a bunch of idiots again.
Well,
You know,
I think it's just he was getting used to the idea of being a national,
Yeah.
and he was starting to finally feel this. He had the ex-wife there; they were going to celebrate. They were all going to celebrate because it was a big thing for all of them. And then it gets kind of shut down like this.
Well, part of it was, I don't know if anyone mentioned, if I missed it, I apologize, but his boss, Baldwin's character, called him and told him,
Yeah.
I've set up a brunch for you with this guy. You need to talk to him. You need to actually see what he has to say, which again, Barry was like, he's going to try to rein me in. I don't want it. I'm not having it. He decided, and of course, his wife calls right after that at the airport, angry with him because he forgot to pick her up at the airport. So he ends up spending the whole day with her and blowing Dietz off, which I'm sure she enjoyed. But because he blew Dietz off, that's probably the main reason why they went ahead and found those scheduling conflicts. Yeah. But
gotta play ball. But
yeah, he showed straight up he did not want to be a team player. And his team was used to that, but the network is not used to that.
Well, again, they needed some time to look at it. Of course, he and Baldwin had that heart-to-heart where Baldwin said, I'm your boss. You're going to do what I say, or you're not going to do it at all. And you could tell that he actually took a blow from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Had a slight coming to reality.
Right.
And there was also, of course, his wife doing this because she was kind of falling for him again. Now, there were a couple of moments in here that looked like bad moments for him, but in a lot of ways showed that there is something there that's not necessarily all bad about the man. You had the one woman, I think it was Debbie, that called in originally, whose only interest was in, well, I don't have a job or anything like that, but I don't care all that much. I just want me a man to take care of me. And, of course, he made fun of her for that.
Yep.
But then she called in again, upset because she's realizing that all of her life's just been kind of nothing.
Right.
And he actually takes time trying to build her back up, working to joke a little bit, get her to laugh a little, get her to understand that it's not all over, but maybe you could actually stand on your 2 feet.
Well, yeah, because she also asked, like, what's wrong with me? Why won't, anyone, like, take care and notice her or whatever,
Right. He does, even though the person who comes on after him apparently was a shrink or a counselor of some sort. He also does do counseling on here. Now, of course, he does it in a very abrasive way that I'm sure Brandon could probably say some of the guidelines that he's violating with some of these things. But there is that one woman. There's also a much darker caller who calls in a couple of times, who has apparently called before, who has rape fantasies and who supposedly has raped multiple people. And when he calls in, they do try to run a trace. They do try to, I think Dan, his producer, I think, or his boss, I think, does call the cops and say, look, this guy called back or whatever. But he wants to just let the man talk. But he does genuinely try to get pertinent information about where he is and what, he does try to also, without just saying, look, man, you suck. He tries to make clear that, But the guy does claim to be very conflicted about his urges. So Barry tries to encourage him to get help. So he's not just spit in your face. He does try sometimes.
He was also trying to stall long enough to get a trace.
Yeah. That one, there were legal issues why he was definitely stalling. But again, he was also genuinely trying to get the guy to reflect. He was trying to get information that could help with an investigation. You know, like I think he was trying to take a more responsible route with that caller. It wasn't the one his boss wanted him to take, but it was the one he thought was the more responsible route. He could have taken a very different route. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Even the call that his wife does in order to, because you can tell that she used to do this under a different name to try and, if he was spiraling out, to try and bring it in. But he could also tell that she was kind of falling for him, and he laid into her in a way that I admit most people on the surface would look at that and say, well, what a dick. No one is just to do this. But the more and more I've watched this, the more and more I realize that he did that on purpose to try and make sure that she didn't leave her husband, who actually cared about her.
Yeah.
And especially not for somebody like him, who he knows is not good for her. So it's sort of like the man himself. The man on the surface is not necessarily the man that you get. There's a lot more depth to it than one would think. And then, of course, we had Kent.
Where there is no depth.
Kent getting to come in person to the radio station.
Yes. After Kent admits the joke, quote unquote, he says something to the effect of, man, I just wanted to meet you. I'm such a big fan. And Barry's like, well, you can meet me anytime. Just come down to the station. And of course, everyone, like his producer, his boss, they're all like waving, no, don't encourage this guy. No. But he invites him down, and he has him come into the studio and join him on the show. And I think that what I was talking about before was that come to Jesus moment was where he's sitting there listening to Kent's stupidity, and he has this look, like this almost growing look of horror on his face, going, what the hell am I doing letting this kid do what he's doing? He's sitting there going, what am I actually doing here? And I think that more than any other moment was where he really starts to go, maybe I need to rethink this. And I think ultimately he ends up giving Kent the boot, right? Pretty much, almost forcefully.
Well, when Kent actually tells a caller to go off themselves, that was the end. There was no keeping Kent on the air after that.
Yeah, he basically told a caller to go kill themselves. And
he pulls out a camera, with kind of everybody's thinking he's going to pull out like a weapon or something, but Kent was basically harmless, which Barry knew that with his instincts, but him making this wild gesture was more about him being screwed over by the network than anything.
Yeah. It was basically him flipping off the man. Yes.
So what about y'all? What did y'all like, Kent?
Oh, the metalhead.
Yeah.
See, knowing him from other roles, because he played the guy. I know he played in Robin Hood as one of the main bad guys under the sheriff of Nottingham. He, I believe, also played the jailer in the Chateau d'If in the Count of Monte Cristo.
His most recent credit was Nope. Played
Yep.
Antlers Holst.
Yep. So
Yep.
he
And
had,
he played Ed Gein in Hitchcock. That's an interesting thing there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So actually, Tammy, you were actually Kemp might have probably been a little older than you were at that time period, but I mean you were around that age. Did you know any Kents when you were in high school?
I can't.
Yeah.
No.
yeah, the kid who acted like the heavy metal dude.
Oh, did I know anybody that acted like him or named like him?
Did you know anybody like him that dressed like him and acted like him?
Oh yeah, just what everybody hung out with. Well, I have about half the people I hung out with because see, I was one of them weird ones, you know. I got along with everybody and nobody ever knew what to think of me because one day we were in the the black suede shoes. They were called. They had it was GASS on the bottom of a Great American Shoe Store, and you would rub the G off on the bottom, so when you stepped in dirt or whatever, it said ass instead. Ass, yeah. And at the time, Jordache jeans and skinny jeans weren't a thing then. You made your skinny jeans, okay? You bought the Jordache and sewed them in yourself, And so one day I'd have the rock t-shirts on and my jeans and that, and I'd be all be walking around with all the stoners all day, and the next day I'd dress all preppy and be hanging around the preppies all day. I had fun because I on the days I looked like a stoner, I'd walk up to my friends that were jocks like, "Look at Jock Day," and here I am like totally looking like a stoner that day. I loved messing with everybody because see, nobody ever knew what to think of me, and it was great.
Catch them all off guard.
Oh, it was awesome. I'd show up at a party and everybody's like, "Is she cool or isn't she or what?" Or I loved it. So, but yes, I had a lot of friends that dressed like that and acted like that, and I got into a lot of the 80s hair bands at the time. I got into a lot of different music in the 80s. A lot. But we had here in Milwaukee there is a venue that in the old days it was called Eagles Ballroom. Now it's called the Rave. But you would go, it's been around for years, years and years. It was like it says, a ballroom at one time before the rock band started playing there. When I started going, but if you got there early enough, you could actually see the bands arrive. And this was no seating show. Okay, it was they let you in and you were there. There was no seats at all or nothing. And I saw lots of bands there. We had meet and greet at a record place called Mainstream, and the bands would go there, and you could meet them before concerts. And I mean, I met Metallica, I met Halloween, I met Armored Saint, I met Grim Reaper, just to name a few. So, yeah, definitely, I one of the guys that wanted to date me. He looked like Vince Neil from Motley Crue, but he had a reputation of basically being a male slut. And the guy I ended up going out with was dead ringer for Axl Rose from Guns N' Roses. So that ended up that's the one that ended up being my high school sweetheart. So, yeah, definitely lots of them around. Some just as whacked out as Kent, some quite not that whacked out.
Well, I mean, that's one thing. I think one of the questions you had. Oh, sorry, Dave. Go ahead. Oh, well, I think one of the things when you were talking, you had asked originally, like one of the major differences between the teenagers in the like mid to late 80s versus the teenagers in the mid to late 90s. And I actually think that one of the biggest differences is there was a nihilism to the 80s that really wasn't as present in the 90s. I mean, the 80s, late 80s, early 90s is pretty much actually the 80s in general is that teen group was the forgotten generation. The last generation to grow up with the Cold War, with the thought of there is no future. And there's a lot of that reflected in culture, especially in that time, and by those who grew up in that culture. So, and I could see that in Kent. It's like, why worry about the future? The future is nil. Enjoy today. Party right now.
Which
Yeah,
in
party on,
actuality,
dude.
which
Party
actually,
on.
in actuality, the hippie generation kind of had some of that same. Let's party in the now. Let's love, man. It was all in the now. Not worry about, because that was the Vietnam era. So
Well, that's no future. It's a different type of nihilism, but yeah, there's definitely a nihilism there. Just like a lot of the later edge millennials, a lot of the younger millennials who just got out of college when the 2008 economic collapse happened. I mean, or even a lot of today's youth, they don't see a future because the average income to being able to afford to stay alive is so despondently large, or those that had the pandemic as their time in school. Now, those are some, like I say, every generation has something that defines them.
Well, I think the 70s was kind of like what David was saying, kind of love and party. But I think 80s, in a way, was let's party to excess. I think in 80s, everything was to excess in the 80s. Let's see how high we can make our hair in the 80s. Let's see how much makeup we can put on. Let's see how tight we can wear the clothes. Let's see how many drugs we can take. Let's see how much we can drink. And the bands promoted it in a way.
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll.
the band, that's what the bands, everything in the 80s. And, if anything that's been on TV and specials and this and stuff, they'll all say the same thing. The 80s was an excess time. Everything was to excess.
Well, so of course we have the long final discussion with Barry does his final monologue, and as they wrap up the night, there's a lot more optimism. Like the guy from the national thing is like, no, this was like excellent. No, we're definitely using this stuff. We're definitely going live. He even seems to show some signs of maybe things might turn around because the current girlfriend kind of confesses that she is in love with him. But of course, as he leaves, he gets mowed down by somebody, as Jacob says, Corey foretold by, if you listen carefully to the therapist that goes on talking about the lost soul in the parking lot.
Right.
But what did y'all think of the last monologue and then, of course, the final end with him being shot?
I was not surprised when he was. I had a feeling when he walked her out, and you saw the image of somebody sitting in a car watching them. I had a feeling it was going to be one of two things. Either somebody was watching her and they were going to get her, or somebody was watching him and he was going to get it.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
because there was that one dude who called and said that he was going to rape somebody. You know,
So I was not surprised that he ended up getting shot in the end. I think his last program was it showed a side of him that I think everybody actually knew was there. And I think he hid it from everybody, So I think his last show was it showed him bare, like if just stripped him naked, it showed him, you know.
Right.
Thought his last show was great. It's a shame that somebody did gut him down at the end, but I wasn't surprised.
Right.
The ending didn't surprise me at all.
Yeah, he pretty much let it go. He let it out. He did.
he spout out so much hate. I think he kind of like was a death magnet in as some.
He basically just had a lot of bottled up, like, which is weird given what he did for a living. But he still had a lot bottled up that he hadn't really let go. And I guess we've talked before, like, he really responded to people who were genuine, but he himself was only sporadically genuine. And this was him being genuine, for better or worse. And the way they set it up to where I guess he was on a turntable and they kept spinning around and around and it was focused on him, but you saw all the different people in the background as the room turned was a pretty interesting way of filming the scene, I think. Again, I think he got a little over the top. Some of those moments where he just almost like he was just choked up with rage and then he let it back, like some of the expressions were almost comical, but overall though it was a pretty intriguing speech.
Of course, it doesn't end with that because it's talk radio. You gotta keep on commenting. So, and that's what it was. The end was basically, I guess, the 80s version of the comments section. as you got to hear people talk about it, and it's interesting to hear a lot of those points people made, and most of them were not hating on him. Even some of the people that they had him calling, and he reamed them out, were not hateful in their discourse over his death. It was an interesting ending. But did y'all have anything else to say as far as on the plot or even this last scene?
Nothing really. I mean, I honestly couldn't stand him as a talk radioist. I guess there were some cringe moments for a little, and that's a lot coming from me. Because I normally like deranged or that, but I think that's why I like the ending, because it was, even though it was expected, it was kind of weird, because the dude had some nasty looking teeth. And You know, it was you didn't know who actually killed him. You know, in the end, entirely, it was kind of left up for grabs. Like just some fanatic ended up killing him. You know, because of something he said. You know. Other than that,
Yep. So, with that being said, why don't we talk a little bit about? Well, there's not really much to say about production. I mean, it's you've got the Act Two is where you've got most of the production as far as like any additional sets, but most of it really was in the booth. And they did do some interesting camera tricks. I mean, Jacob actually listed the thing about the turntable. There were some interesting things, but what did y'all think about the production design, costumes, sets, all that stuff?
Well, the extended flashback sequence, they used a soft filter lens, and I think almost like I felt like it was kind of a sepia-ish tinge, but definitely it looked different. And I guess gave it kind of the hazy memory look, which I thought that was kind of cool. But yeah, overall, the production was pretty solid. It was a pretty relatively straightforward, I suppose you could say.
Indeed. Well, what about the music?
the music.
I actually like the music for the most part in this. It's not quite like my next one that I have at the end of the month. But this one, music-wise, it does have some music that does make it enjoyable. Nothing that I'm remembering, which is, could be because I had a fever of 100 and something when I was originally watching this, which is climbing right now. But I'm having a hard time remembering it. I feel like it was appropriate, but I cannot remember it. Anybody else have a thought on the music?
I wasn't really paying attention to the music, but the music was composed by Stuart Copeland.
Well, wasn't his song when he came on Bad to the Bone?
Yep.
Yeah.
And that seemed to fit for him.
There was also one scene where he wanted to punish a caller by playing Disco Inferno over and over again.
Yeah.
2 times in a row.
But and I think Stu let it run like 3 times and then ducked his head into the room and said, I can't take it anymore. I need to put something else on.
He said, yeah. They're like, okay, we'll make it 3 times then.
But so the use of music, like songs, was effective. And the music itself was effective. But I honestly, this is a rare movie where I would say the music was overplayed in certain scenes. I don't know if anyone else thought that, but I thought it was a little much in some of the scenes.
I just didn't notice the music per se. The only other music that was played besides the Disco Inferno was, I guess there was something called Telephone and Rubber Band. And I guess KGAB Radio's ID. So, but Stuart Copeland was the music guy behind, and I guess he did stuff for films like South Park, Bigger and Uncut, as well as Rumble Fish. He did some stuff for some episodes behind the series Dead Like Me. So I know there was others that he did, but I was just hanging on with you.
Well, with luck, Dave, I'm hoping that the soundtrack on my other choice will appeal to not just you, but everybody else as it goes. This one, to me, was not as iconic a soundtrack, but there will definitely at least be one song that sticks out on that week. So, with that being said, we have reached the end of talk radio. But before our listeners end their enjoyable talk, what about favorite scenes? And did you have a favorite talk radio show that you listened to at one time in your life on the regular? And I guess I'll start with Jake.
What's up?
Favorite scene, and if you had a favorite talk radio show you listened to at one point.
Well, favorite scene. Favorite is a hard word to use with this one because some of the most effective scenes were not really favorite scenes. This character is, like I said, it's a weird word to use with him. But I would say maybe that moment where he's sitting there looking, even though Kent pissed me off. There were most every scene where he's speaking or talking just infuriated me. But the scene where we see Barry's reaction, where we see him just slowly drawing back on what have I done, I liked that. I thought that was very effective. And I suppose that scene that I just mentioned where Stu was complaining that Disco Inferno had worn out its welcome, that kind of amused me. There were a couple parts like that. And even though the guy horrified me and the things that he was saying were despicable, the scene where he's talking with that neo-Nazi that was the older guy that, again, sounded polite and erudite and all that stuff, I was intrigued and horrified in the same time. I wouldn't call it a favorite scene, but I thought it was one of the most effective scenes. Let's put it that way. As far as I've never really gotten into talk radio myself. I've always preferred music, and when I do listen to non-music programs, it's usually more news-based. But I was and remain, despite some of the things the man has said recently, I do remain a fan of the show Frasier. And so I guess Frasier's show is the main talk radio show I'm familiar with. And it had its moments. As did, we got a little bit of Bulldog show on there too. And that always amused me when I got to hear some of that. So I guess I'm cheating a little bit, but I just didn't really listen to much talk radio myself.
Oh. What about you, Tammy? Favorite scene, favorite talk radio program at one point?
I don't know what to pick right now for a scene, but I do remember I got through talk radio back in the 80s. It was called Rock Live. And you could call in and talk with, you guessed it, a rock star. And I got through and got to talk to Robert Plant.
Oh, that would have been a great thing.
Oh, it was cool, and I still have cassette tapes were a thing then, So I have myself on tape talking to Robert Plant, which was pretty cool. And this was before Skechers was a big brand name. They were just like coming out, so I won a pair of all leather steel-toed hiking boots, Skechers hiking boots for getting through, and his new CD at the time. So yeah, it was pretty cool. And I had listened to it at other times with other artists, but I knew it was him that night, So I think that was the only talk radio that I've ever listened to, but that was a thing then, you know. Um, Scenes. I guess I'd have to say when Kent was in the studio, it just his reactions and his facial expressions and what he said and everything as a reaction to Kent. You know, like every time Kent would do something, like Kent would go in the microphone, and he'd look at him and be like, okay, or you know, it's that whole thing where I thought that was kind of amusing, you know, because it was not just Barry's reaction, but everybody's reaction to Kent when he was in the studio. So,
All right. Well, thank you. How about you, Dave?
As far as favorite scenes, the ending wasn't. I couldn't really get behind the character, but as far as favorite talk show hosts, I would have to say Bob and Brian
Oh,
was one of mine. Um, I know for many years they put out like CDs and stuff like that, and they were behind the Bob and Brian Burger at George Webb's,
Bob
which is
O'Brien still puts out their CD.
they still put
They
out
still
radio.
they still put out a CD every year. Yes.
So yeah, and then I remember Mancow for a while, and Howard Stern. Mancow in Wisconsin, he was a little bit more like this guy,
yeah.
if I remember correctly. I even remember having a couple of CDs of his, and he was more comedy stuff. So, and I think I remember listening to Charlie Sykes for a while. So, other than that, those are my radio personalities that I used to listen to. So,
Well,
I don't as much anymore, but
I understand. I listen to audiobooks. So, as far as me, I would say my favorite scene, again, as Jacob says, well, favorite being a term. I would say the scene where he's talking to that one neo-Nazi, and the neo-Nazi was giving him the book title as if, you know, and he's like, yeah, you wouldn't have read this. And he surprised him by actually coming back and saying, yeah, I read it. And then just went right through and gave his own little review about the book. And it just shows that this dude that is much more intelligent than they give him credit for. Of course, when he's reading these books and they're barely able to scratch out what they want in crayon, it's kind of funny in that way, how they hold themselves to. And in a way, it is entertaining that the people who are doing that are the ones that are holding themselves out as the superior race. But I did find that fun. I used to listen to a guy called Jack Gravely, who was a Richmonder on the air, and he'd give a lot of local Richmond stuff. He was a bit of a political pundit, but he wasn't super hardcore. He was more of a left of center dude, but most of his stuff was local stuff, which was kind of good because I was working out of Emporia, but I'd always catch him as I came close to Richmond on the airwaves when I was driving about. And I always liked listening to the callers because he would spar back and forth, especially with his more conservative ones, and sometimes they'd win a point, sometimes he'd win a point, and it was kind of great because he was willing to let anybody speak on it. It wasn't just fights that he could easily win, and that was always a great thing. And a lot of those callers, instead of death threats, a lot of them would actually talk about how much they appreciated him and his show, even though they disagreed with him politically, which You don't see that these days. Ever. So that was something kind of, that was just a cool experience back in the, I guess, early aughts. But with that being said, I hand this over to you, Dave, because you even have next week's film, as a matter of fact.
Alrighty. My name is David Straggy. I am one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. But let us go around and see what these fine folks who have been talking with me a little bit about themselves. So, Jake, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I am Kotobukijake. I am, on occasion, the co-host of the YouTube channel SeptumSin versus the World, and I also, and I believe we have a video coming up this week, if I remember correctly. I also have keep myself pretty busy much of the time. I got a full-time gig and side gigs to keep straight. Sometimes I'll be leading a class on Saturday, for example, and that'll be good. It'll be on bringing wildlife into the landscape. I do spend a great deal of time outdoors and studying outdoors, and but also doing a lot of movies too. This month, of course, we're trying to get our final selections together for the Versus Award nominations at the end of the month, and I still got a fair bit of viewing left to do. I don't know how much of it I'll get through, but that's taking up a fair bit of time. But obviously, I also like to make some time to watch movies, to come on this channel and talk with these fine folks about various films. And like I said at the outset, I feel like this is a particular movie that warrants discussion, so I'm kind of glad we had a chance to. Well, I guess that's going to do for me for this go around. Have at it.
Alrighty. Heading over to you, Tammy. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
I'm David's fiance, and I go on this channel, another one, and talk about movies with everybody. Get their opinions, check out movies like, a lot of times they're ones that I probably never would have watched. Like, I don't know if I would have seen this one otherwise. But, and now that it's summer, I enjoy taking my 1972 Grand Prix out and about. And that's about it.
Alrighty. Heading over to you, Brandon. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Well, I'm SeptumSin, a SeptumSin versus the World. We love ourselves some movies, and we hope you will too. Of course, we've been trying to put out some weekly content. Of course, I do a weekly anime show, which just announces the anime coming out for the week. But I also try to do a show every Thursday. I just put out a review of a film that I was asked to check out and throw a review down. So, and that is MR9, which is a Versus Award contender for the year 2023. It did not get anywhere on my schedule, but who knows? Maybe it would on y'all's. But you can check that out on the site now. And of course, next week is going to be the first time that Jake and I have gotten together for a pickup video in a long time. But it's going to be good. And we're working on that tabletop horror series. I've still got those to edit. Hopefully when my mind is more together and I'm less rambly. But we've got a lot of cool stuff coming up. A lot of stuff we're working on. And with luck, some cool stuff in the future. At least we hope anyway.
Alrighty. Is that pretty much it then for you?
That's all I have to say about that.
Alrighty. So my name is David Straggy. I'm one of the founding fathers of Inside Movies Galore. So thank you for coming along with us on this fantabulous journey we've been having. And we definitely have another cool movie to discuss called Down a Dark Hall, which is based on a Lois Duncan teen novel from back in the 90s. But yeah, it's going to be exciting, and I'm going to be continuing to work on things for the second anthology with Brandon here. So hopefully we'll get some more accomplished in the coming weeks. And we'll definitely be trying to get more done for the anthology. And hopefully I'll be able to come up with some more dialogue for some other parts of a short film that I'm putting together. So wish me luck, and hopefully we'll see you back next week here on Inside Movies Galore. Everyone say good night.
Good night.
Good
Oh,
night. I guess we're stuck with each other.
We did release the Blu-ray and DVD of the Tales of the Forgotten Act 1 a week ago or so. So please go ahead and try to grab one while you can. So in any case, like, share, and subscribe. Good night, all.
Good to know.
Good night.